So what exactly is a freight forwarder? One of the hardest things for me to answer when people ask me what I do is explaining what a freight forwarder is. The name itself is pretty confusing. I honestly wish they'd rename it logistics partner or shipping coordinator or shipping partner or something along those lines. But the problem with that is those are actual occupational terms within the industry, and they don't really encompass fully what a freight forwarder does. So today I want to get into that. Before we begin, my name's Lawrence Ho. I'm co-founder of Maximum Freight and a licensed custom broker. So being a freight forwarder requires specific licensing and financial requirements from the FMC, otherwise known as the Federal Maritime Commission. It's a government agency that governs all maritime-related activities, including carrier activities, regulating rates, enforcing regulations of ocean-related transportation. If you go to the FMC's website, their definition of a freight forwarder or an NVOCC is kind of dry and might leave you a little bit more confused than it does enlightened. So I want to kind of dive in and give more of a user-friendly explanation of what a freight forwarder is and what they do and why and when you should use one. And if you stay to the end, I'll also explain some of the best practices you can do when choosing a freight forwarder and also where to find them. So an NVOCC is what's known as a non-vessel operating common carrier. And before we kind of get into that, I think it's important to define what a common carrier is. But it's really simple. A common carrier is simply a transportation company that moves cargo for the public, whether that's passengers, cargo, freight. It's basically just someone that, or an organization that offers transportation for the public. So they're basically for hire. And because they're for hire and because they serve the public, they have to meet different standards and regulations in terms of safety and things of that nature. A freight forwarder is an NVOCC, which stands for non-vessel operating common carrier. You don't really have to remember that. All that means is that we move international cargo on the ocean and through other means on behalf of the public. We are regulated by the FMC to handle all aspects of transportation, such as documentation, bookings, providing rates. If you want to become an NVOCC, it's pretty involved. You have to meet certain bond requirements, financial requirements, and prove you have experience in the industry. You have to have references and meet all kinds of other standards required by the Federal Maritime Commission. So it basically is ensuring that you have the experience and the knowledge to handle international shipment on behalf of the public. So NVOCC versus a VOCC, I just wanted to kind of clarify that. And it's kind of important to distinguish an NVOCC versus a VOCC. Sometimes customers are under the impression that a freight forwarder actually owns and operates its own vessels. And that's not the case. A freight forwarder might own things such as trucks, forklifts, small cargo vans, but they don't actually own and operate the ocean vessels that carry cargo. And they can't influence the shipment routes, cargo space, or destinations. And I just kind of wanted to point that out versus a VOCC, a vessel operating common carrier, because it just kind of helps distinguish between the ocean carriers that own and operate the large vessels you see docked at the port versus the people behind the scenes managing businesses, managing the business of ocean freight, which are the freight forwarders. And it's kind of important to distinguish because I actually have a friend in the industry who have told me some funny stories, such as customers calling them when they have forgotten to load something on a container, and then calling up their freight forwarder and saying, hey, I need you to turn the ship back so I can put something back in the container. And that might kind of sound funny, but this is the impression sometimes people have when they hire a freight forwarder. Obviously, my friend had to call and explain to the customer that that's impossible, and they don't influence the routing of the ship, the sailing schedule, or the final destinations because they are a freight forwarder and not a VOCC, a vessel operating common carrier. So how exactly will a freight forwarder help your business, and what does a freight forwarder actually do, and what role do they play in a very complex world of shipping? And it turns out a freight forwarder does quite a lot, and this is really paramount to why choosing the right forwarder is super important. I'd like to think of freight forwarders as freight or logistic consultants. Think of the reason why you hire a travel agent, a lawyer, real estate broker. You can definitely book your own flights or represent yourself in court or search for your own homes, but you hire someone to represent yourself on your behalf in those situations for a specific reason. And the reason is, as you know, those experts understand how to manage and navigate through a very complex landscape in their respective fields. So shipping is really not any different. While on paper it sounds kind of straightforward, behind the scenes international shipping can get really complex pretty quickly, and there's a lot of entities at play and things in motion. So some of the benefits of hiring an expert in logistics, uh, I think it's really comes down to two major things. One, and this is a really, really big one, it saves you a ton of time. Because if you really want to know how to do something properly, you're going to have to research the process. You're going to have to look up information and kind of do a lot of studying to make sure you get it right. So it's going to save you a lot of time. Secondly, and more importantly, I think it saves you from making some really costly mistakes. Uh, this industry is like, for logistics, when you work in logistics, it's pretty unforgiving. So a good freight forwarder is not just capable of making a booking, quoting you a shipping rate. They're very deeply connected to the shipping industry. They're up to date with the latest news, regulations. They also have experience with solving complex problems that can arise during international shipping. So all these things are super helpful when shipping internationally, but I really think the true value of a freight forwarder comes from their ability to apply their expertise and their connection to the industry for issues specific to your shipments. So a good freight forwarder is not one that just knows everything. In fact, you're really not going to find a freight forwarder that knows everything. But what you really want is someone who's willing to go do the research and find the proper answers. Someone who's resourceful and going to be patient and take the time to really find the solutions to your specific needs. A forwarder may not own a vessel, like I mentioned before, but they still have access to a lot of their own assets, such as trucking, special loading and crating equipment, especially tools and assets to help them with your specific shipments. Some forwarders will also own and operate a warehouse, which really expands their capacity. That way they can store your goods, they can manage your inventory, you'll have a place to inspect your cargo, maybe even perform custom 3PL and fulfillment solutions. So it's definitely a benefit. Forwarders may also own and operate their own trucks, which allows for easier coordination of picking up containers at the port or at container freight stations, otherwise known as CFSs. Another asset your forwarder might have is having a yard, and having a yard can also make your shipment a little bit easier to coordinate. In case a trailer or container has to be parked overnight or stored temporarily, it just kind of helps with receiving scheduling, weather delays, and other situations where keeping cargo outside the port is more optimal. If your forwarder does not directly own assets, it's not really a problem. They're probably going to have really good relationships with a network of warehouses, trucks, yards, and other vendors that are important to your shipping needs. And in addition to this, forwarders may have in-house custom brokers to handle customs or use licensed professionals within their network to cover other services. They don't necessarily have to have their own in-house broker or other agencies or services in-house. Forwarders are also going to have access to good cargo insurance providers should you need to further insure your goods beyond maybe what the carrier is providing, which usually isn't much. And one thing I really want to point out when it comes to forwarding is the international connections. So freight forwarders are internationally connected. I think a lot of times when we talk about freight forwarding, we're talking about the services they offer on the domestic side of things. A lot of focus is on the domestic side of international shipping, but good forwarders will also have offices or trusted agents across the globe. So this is particularly important as you're going to need someone good at the origin and the destination to handle your shipment before and after it, either before it boards or after it discharges the vessel. So as complex as shipping is in the USA, it can actually be even more difficult once it reaches abroad. So a forwarder's relationship with its international agents, its global agents, is super important to shipping going smoothly and to avoid delays. You really want to think of your forwarder not only as your USA connection, but kind of the hub that connects you to anywhere else in the world where your goods need to arrive safely. Don't be afraid to ask your forwarder about their global network and who they work with specifically at the destination you plan to ship. It's kind of just like having assets I mentioned earlier. A forwarder doesn't have to necessarily have its own agents, or not its own agents, but its own office overseas, but it needs to have good, trusting relationships overseas where you're shipping to. So I just want to also cover what a freight forwarder cannot do. So as mentioned before, freight forwarders, they can't influence the actual transit times, routings, or other scenarios that are regulated by the FMC, customs agencies, port authorities, or vessel operators. They also can't influence things such as the terms or Incoterms of your shipment, which you agree with your suppliers or your buyers. But they can be a good liaison between the parties involved in the shipment in providing information in advance and helping you avoid unnecessary complications. They're just think of them kind of as like a hub also between everyone, the vendors, the carriers, the buyer, the supplier. They're just kind of a hub for all those communications. So rely on your freight forwarder to do the research and provide all the information that you need before arranging for any international shipment. I think this is just a really large part of a freight forwarder's value, is that they can better prepare you before you even load, a container or load onto a vessel. They can help prepare you do the right thing to avoid mistakes. If you're looking for a freight forwarder, a really great place to start is the FMC website itself. You can go to fmc.gov and search for NVOCCs and freight forwarders in your area by city or state. You don't necessarily have to work with a forwarder who is in your local area. Freight forwarders are authorized to operate on a national level. So you can work with your forwarder face to face, but you just have to be aware that if you go to your local office, if you find someone near you, they may actually designate another office out of state to handle specific shipments or destinations. So while it is good to meet face to face, just be aware that, say you meet someone in Texas and you're exporting to China, the China office might be handled by someone, I don't know, in New York, right? It can happen. So it is an international network. It's a very broad network. So you may not exactly work with the person that you see face to face. However, I do think it's good to talk to the forwarder and say, listen, who am I working with? Am I working with one team, or am I get in touch with someone different every single time? I do think, especially when you're starting out, it's good to know exactly who you're working with. The other thing I want to cover is customs. Our recommendation is to let your freight forwarder handle the customs clearance of your goods if you're importing. It's just easier to deal with one entity rather than dealing with a broker and a forwarder separately. You can do that. I just think it's a lot easier to deal with a forwarder that can do that on your behalf. And they don't have to have an in-house custom broker on staff. They usually, if they don't have that, they're going to have a network of brokers that they trust that are qualified to handle the shipment. It's just less communication for you to manage and less work for you to keep track of. So last thing that I kind of want to cover is what information you're going to have to provide to your forwarder to get a quote, to get set up. It's relatively easy. The forwarder is going to ask you for personal information, business information, probably a signed limited power of attorney to file customs and documents on your behalf. They are going to need your ID as part of the customs requirements, and they're going to need a commercial invoice and packing list for the goods that you're trying to ship. If you're not familiar with that, don't worry. They can definitely help you that. You're just going to have to provide the details of your shipment. So in conclusion, use a forwarder. I think it's great to use a forwarder if you're going to do international shipping. Don't try to make it a DIY project. They're just going to make your life a lot easier. Lean on your forwarder to get the information you need to make sure you're shipping correctly. Again, it's good to learn for yourself, but I think until you're like really, really confident in certain fields, it's much better to give it to a licensed forwarder to handle your international shipments. The industry itself and the entities within the industry are very unforgiving when it comes to mistakes, and those mistakes can cost hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. So remove the anxiety that comes with international shipping, form a good relationship with a forwarder, and just let them do the heavy lifting, let them do the bulk of the work. So if you're ready to make the next move in contacting your freight forwarder and getting quotes and getting set up, make sure to check out our guide to get the best possible quote for your goods in our video series. And links are also below to contact Maximum Freight for more shipping information and news.